is Detox, and I am here with our guest host, our person that backs us up all the time, Leslie Yancey. How are you,
Hello,
Leslie?
everyone. I'm back.
Listen, he's so subdued. Hi, everyone. I'm back. Jeez,
I'm back
girl. And she's
once
like,
again.
once again, she's our fill-in because we miss MZ, but MZ is taking a fire hose of education right now. She's full-time bachelor's degree and mommy and rocking it all out. And so I was like, yeah, probably trying to do a podcast every week on top of everything is not a great idea. And she agreed. She's like, I'll take a step back for a little while. I said, that's all right. I said, we'll bring in our partner in crime,
Right.
the one and only.
Coming back.
Yep. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Doing great.
Yeah. How's your new podcast going? Hero to
It's going
Hero.
really well. I've had some amazing guests, getting a lot of good feedback. So I'm excited about that.
I listened to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually didn't listen last night.
You didn't?
I had a new episode air last night, but no, I didn't. I didn't listen to it. So I'll catch it next Monday. I'll catch it. I was
Girl,
there. I was there, so I know what was said.
it's like the words came out of my mouth.
That's right. I mean, I was kind of there to begin with, but yeah. So I've had some great guests and just really appreciative of everybody that's came on.
It's a good podcast. I've
I,
listened to and truly enjoyed it. I'm not just saying that to smoke. Let me blow smoke up your ass. I
right.
mean, truly, it's a good podcast.
Well, I appreciate that.
And you're in a world that few people will fully understand. You deal with a lot of not only first responders, but the special force guys and
Yeah.
girls and all them, and that's their own culture right there.
Yeah.
So
It's a little odd how a girl from Southern Ohio ended up in these circles, but I'm thankful to be here and love talking to them, love hearing people's stories. So that's pretty much what we do.
right. And it's good. So if you guys get a chance, go listen to Hero to Hero. You can listen to a Coming Home Well radio stream.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're on there. I don't know. I'll randomly listen and I'll be like, why
Hey,
am
I
I
know
hearing
that voice.
Leslie? Why
I
am
know
I hearing
that
me?
voice. Yeah.
I've done that twice.
Yeah.
I'm like, why do I hear myself and like literally forget that the radio's going? And then it went on to one of our podcasts. Yeah.
I'm even confused of where all I am, actually. So,
But
you never know where I might pop up.
literally and
That's
figuratively.
right. Right. Literally and figuratively, yes.
I just saw your Facebook post the other day when you're like, I'm playing racquetball with a 280-pound child.
Yeah. 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 That was frightening. That was fun, but it was frightening. Yes.
That's
Yes.
your what number child is this? The
That's my
third?
third child.
And
Yeah.
he's a senior.
He's a senior. He's going to be playing college football this fall. So, playing racquetball with him, I definitely take my life into my own hands. Yes. And he doesn't go easy on me at all.
And if you see when Leslie and I met, and then we kind of we became friends, but when I would see her Facebook post, I would see this little mom with her children. And your children are all taller than you and little petite things, right? Little petite Leslie. So I
Yeah.
thought, I mean, she is petite in a way. And
No,
I
I'm
said,
not.
my gosh, you're just the shrimp. And she goes, I know. She's like, at 5'9", who would have thought? I'm like, you what? You could
Yeah.
not tell. I'm 5'3", so I'm
Right.
really short. So at 5'9", I'm like, you look like you're 5 feet tall. How tall are your kids? They're really
Yeah.
tall.
Well, my middle child, the one that's Army National Guard, he's 6'7". So my 13-year-old daughter is almost 6'2". So
13. Yeah, mine is praying to God she hits 5'3".
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
showed
So
her that. I go, she's the same age as you.
yeah, we have lots of adventures, and a lot of them are a little dangerous at times.
Or expensive. 30 plates of
And
sushi
expensive.
later.
Yes, they put away $140 worth of sushi yesterday.
That was
Yes,
darling.
yeah,
Yeah. They keep you grounded though, right?
absolutely, 100%. Yeah,
Yep.
keep me
Yep.
going.
It kind of helps you stay in touch, which actually kind of a weird spinoff, but it is a spinoff to kind of what we're going to talk about today. So unique topic and unique in the sense that we don't talk about it because I think there's a lot of shame and guilt and all kinds of stuff that comes with this. But I had somebody step forward saying, I want to talk about this. And so I was like, oh, let's talk about it. So, what we're going to talk about, is that we're going to talk about when we're struggling, right, in our world. And we're talking about healthcare workers, first responders, all of us. When we're struggling, we never feel like we can because our job is take care of other people, right? So sometimes we choose, and I'm not going to say we don't know we're not struggling. I'm pretty sure we all know, but we choose to kind of tuck it away because we got other things to do. We are a nurse, we are a firefighter, we are a police officer, we are a doctor, we are a mom, we are a dad. We got things to do. We're military. We seriously cannot, we don't have time for us. We have to go defend country, et cetera, right? So what happens when we do not pay attention to that? We are struggling. We don't recognize it, but somebody else does, maybe in our chain of command, and they say, we are putting a cog in the wheel here, and you are no longer going to perform your job right now. Right. So it's twofold. So I'm going to introduce our guest, Nadia Merchant, not to be confused with Natalie Merchant, although we're all trying to figure out. We're going to do Ancestry and see if they're related. I'm going to go check that out.
Make sure you get back to me on that.
I will. I'm going to go look that up there. So, but Nadia, it's super nice to have you. Nadia is a police officer in Ontario. And Nadia, how did we meet? Was it through, did you reach out? Did somebody reach out? I do not know how we got connected.
Yeah, we got we got connected through the parent stream.
Oh, Coming Home Well. So through Cindy.
Yeah.
Cindy finds all kinds of people. She's our executive director.
Yep, we found each other on Instagram, and then she connected us via email.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember that part. And then we talked.
Yeah, and then we talked.
And we had a good talk. We did. And then she said, let's do this. And I'm like, you want to come on our podcast? Okay. You've been warned. Come along. Enter if you dare.
Right.
That's right. Our It's the Bedpans lair. Here we are. All right. So I'm going to let you kind of tell your story and where you want to go. And we're just going to have a discussion about this, because it's funny when I say this, when I'm talking about when we don't recognize our own struggles and somebody else does, and you're sitting in front of me, I feel a little weird saying that because I'm like, yeah, I'm not trying to poke at her. And we know that, right? Because you're like, no, we got to talk about this. But even for me, it makes me feel a little wiggy, like I'm not trying to judge her. This is just kind of what happens, So if I'm having that feeling, somebody that's going through that, imagine the feelings they're having. So
yeah, no judgment at all. I mean, that is what happened, right? I mean, I'm a police officer here in Ontario, and I'd been a police officer at that time. This was 2 years ago. That sort of things, the cog went in the wheel 2 years ago. I'd been policing for 8 years, and that last 8-ish months is sort of when everything went to shit. I went to several traumatic calls at work that I struggled to deal with. But I kind of took them away. Like I knew they were hard, and I knew that there was a struggle kind of, happening in my mind. But like you kind of hinted at, you as first responders and healthcare workers, like we're just so used to operating as if we're impermeable, because we're just expected to go to the next patient, to the next call, because it doesn't stop. Like that's part of the way it works, right? You deal with your patient, you move on to the next one. You deal with your call, you move on to the next one. And you're so used to swooping in and saving the day. It's like, it takes something out of you to step back and be like, wait a minute, I'm now on the other end of this. Like I need help. And that's what happened. I mean, I went to several traumatic deaths in the summer of 2021. And then a homicide in early 2022. And a couple other things that happened that were like related to some of the other calls I'd been to that were sort of really triggering for me. And March 3rd of 2022, up the chain of command, my staff sergeant pulled me into the office one morning on a day shift and said, Nadia, like, what's with you? Like, you're not answering my emails. Like, you're not yourself, like, in terms of, your quality of work. Like, what's happening with you? And I broke down in the ugliest, snottiest cry I've probably ever had in front of somebody that I wasn't actually comfortable, having that kind of emotional
the ugly
response.
cry. Yeah.
It was ugly. It was so ugly. It was snotty. It was ugly. It was heaving. It was horrible. And I bawled. I bawled and I bawled. And I think he was a little bit taken aback. He was very sweet, but I think he was really taken aback by just how hard I started crying. But it was like the floodgates just opened and I had absolutely no control at that point. And I mean, considering I answered his question with bawling, I couldn't really shove it under the rug after that.
It's
Right. Yeah.
I couldn't really hide it anymore. There was nothing I could do to back off of, the the gravity of the situation at that point. So I told him that I was struggling, that the calls that I had been to in the summer previous had sort of stacked up in my mind. And some of the calls I'd gone to since that time had stacked up against me as well. And, he was like, okay, when do you have a doctor? I'm like, yeah, I've got a doctor. He's like, when's your next appointment? I'm like, tomorrow. It's like, okay, I guess talk to her and, get back to me about what's going on here. And at that time I was like, you know what? I'm going to be fine. I just need a quick break. I'm going to take a couple deep breaths, maybe take, a couple of shifts off. I'll be right back. And I still couldn't, I guess, admit to myself that I really needed more than a quick break. But it slowly started to sink in when I was starting to see more clearly reactions to certain stimuli that were, very, very triggering. I spoke to my doctor the next day and, we had a couple appointments right back to back. And I don't remember how many, but, a couple days later, she was like, Nadia, it's this, you have PTSD. And I remember being crushed by that, absolutely crushed by that, because I'd always been resilient. I kind of just expected myself to just operate as if I was impermeable. Like, I didn't think this would happen to me. Right. And right, like it just took it gouged me. It really did. Like I really, really struggled with that. And the stigma around it, and then I didn't want to be seen as not good enough, not competent enough, not strong enough to do my job. And worse yet, I didn't want to be seen as less than because I was a female police officer. And, it felt like the worst thing ever when my staff sergeant pulled me aside and told me that I couldn't come back to the road. But even as he said it, I knew it was the right thing.
Right.
It was the right thing. It was the hardest thing, but it was the right thing.
Yeah.
So what were?
Go ahead, Leslie.
I didn't use the sign.
You didn't pick...
So, like, Nadia, were you seeing any signs personally? I mean, did you feel that you were spiraling at all?
Yes and no. I think I could feel myself emotionally very tense, like a rubber band about to snap. Like I could feel that tension and that anxiety. I was anxious about going to work. I was anxious about dealing with more traumatic things, to the point where going to work seemed like a very, very stressful thing.
Right. Yeah.
But the like worst of the triggers, for lack of a better word, didn't really like settle in until after I was off. And then it sort of all kind of started to piece together, and I started to realize just how bad of a mental state I was in.
So did you realize that they were actually triggers prior to you going to the doctor, or did you like, oh, okay, now that makes sense after you went to those appointments?
After I went to the appointments, after I started talking to my doctor, she's an awesome psychologist. She's been wonderful for me. And it was after appointments with her and her sort of validating the fact that yes, I had seen traumatic calls and it was enough. Like,
Yeah.
it was enough to be real. It was enough to hurt. It was enough to be struggling.
Right.
And that's when it started all started to come together.
So when I do public speaking, I do a ton of
Mhm.
education on the sympathetic nervous system and how it reacts to traumatic events. Because I think one of the biggest things is people are not educated
Yeah.
on how the sympathetic nervous system responds to trauma. And we are having these triggers, we are having these intrusive thoughts, we are having these
Mhm.
nightmares, we're having all these things. And no one ever connects those dots for us and says, look, this is your
Right.
sympathetic nervous system reacting to a traumatic event. And we can't change that. We have no
Yeah.
control over that. The
Right.
sympathetic nervous system is here, fight or flight. That's what it's
Yep.
intended for. And then you throw us into these high stress, high performance jobs, and the sympathetic nervous system is constantly being activated, and that's
Mhm.
not what it was intended for. So a big thing that I do is educate people. Hey, do you have something in particular that bothers you? When you see a bloody, gory movie on TV, or you smell something, or you hear something, those are triggers. And I think
Yeah.
that's, and you know, to your point, you were having those triggers, they were popping
Mhm.
up, but you didn't have the education at the time to say that's what's happening.
Even
Right.
I mean, it's funny as you're saying that, Leslie. I'm like, oh yeah, even the educated can dodge that one
Oh,
because
absolutely.
I will be a perfect example is that I didn't know for years, decades. I had an event where it caused me to have a very strong reaction, and it was a meeting, and I got ambushed, and honestly, the two people were douchebags, and typically I'd be like, whatever, fuck off, pound sand. Like that would be my
Mhm.
normal, like, and then off I'd go, right? I'd be like,
Right.
Right.
whatever. When the next day I was in a meeting with those people, and a friend of mine was in this meeting, and I said, hey, what kind of meeting was that? And she goes, what do you mean? Like, was it stressful? Would you call it intense? No, it was our boring meeting. I doodled on my notepad. It was like our standard meeting. I said, check my pulse. It was 120. So now I'm having extreme reactions, right?
Right.
So now, after leaving the military, calming my ass down, looking back at everything, I have actually had those symptoms, not on that scale, but I had the stomach churning. I
Mm-hmm.
had that adrenaline rush. I didn't realize me coming home talking about things over and over was me trying to come out, like dump
Process.
the adrenaline. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
processing and
Yeah.
I'm trying to I did not realize that.
Right.
And I'm a nurse, right?
Yeah.
Like we have the knowledge, but when we have to take that knowledge
Right.
and apply it to ourselves. Because if I saw that in someone else, I'd be like, oh, hell no. I
Right.
could
Right.
see
That's
you're
textbook.
reacting. Yeah, it is textbook,
Yeah.
right? And it took an extreme response for me to go, oh, and I know sympathetic nervous system, and I know cortisol release, and I know blah, blah, and I can spit all that stuff out.
Right.
And here I am
Right.
dodging it, right? So, and I say that because that really is a big point of what we're talking about today. People need to hear what Nadia is saying and need to have this discussion to reflect on themselves and say, ooh, shit, that stuff's happening.
Yeah.
And
And I'm
go
sure
ahead.
Nadia had the training, right? I'm
Yeah,
sure you've had this type of training before to know what these symptoms and signs are.
somebody
I mean,
escalating.
not so much from like the medical perspective, but just, it was more addressed like, hey, if you're really angry and you don't know why, if you're really emotional and you don't know why, and you've, dealt with all these traumatic calls, like maybe it could be, some residual trauma from the calls. But even still, I don't know, like, if it was pride or what, but like, I don't think I would have seen it myself. Honestly, I
Right.
don't. I don't.
You, Nadia, you made a comment when we talked in like our pre-meet. You said
Mhm.
something that, matter of fact, I wrote it down right here so I wouldn't forget it. You had said you actually had been going to a psychologist
Oh yeah,
before
yeah.
all this happened, and I kind
Mhm.
of smirked at that. Not in a, I smirked in the sense of like, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So tell me that, like, tell the difference between you were in there going to a therapist already, which really should be quote unquote preventative or
Yeah.
mitigating, right?
Mhm.
And yet,
So I think, sorry, so I was going to say, like, so I was seeing my doctor for maybe a year or so before everything happened.
and this was a
And
psychologist, right? This was your
yes,
yeah.
yeah. And but I mean, she's got a pretty busy practice, and we were seeing each other, like, we didn't have a standing appointment. We would see each other every couple of weeks, kind of as her schedule allowed it. And I was still working days and nights and stuff, right? So it was also dependent upon my schedule. And so the first instance was a baby death, and I think I spoke with her shortly after, and we kind of began to work through it. Um, the second one was also a child death. I didn't talk to her after that one. Um, like, as specifically, sorry, those two events were actually one day apart, like uh, one after the other. I spoke mostly about the first one with her, not so much the second. I don't think I realized how much the second bothered me until quite a bit later. And then 2 weeks after those two incidents was a third, and I didn't pick up the phone and call her right away, and I probably should have. Um, and I don't think it was really till like March when I went off the road that I really like dug into what I was actually feeling and actually thinking, and how much I was genuinely struggling. Um, like, I think I was very surface level with her about it initially. I don't think I ever dug deep enough into my own emotional response to have a raw conversation about it. Like,
Right.
if I talk too much about it, if I delve too deeply into this, I'm going to be a mess.
Right.
So let's kind
Protective.
of just
Yeah.
around this, and we'll talk about it, but like, I'm not going to tell you just how deeply I'm feeling. And it wasn't until after I went off the road and I was really, really, really struggling that we started to see each other, multiple times a week and have standing appointments, and I mean, at that point, I couldn't really escape her. I tried. She never lets me. She never lets me.
You're naked now. Come on, let's
I
go.
know.
Right.
She's wonderful because she calls me on my shit. But
Uh-huh.
I tried to escape her initially, and it didn't help. It didn't help.
She's like, come back here. You're not
Yeah.
done yet.
Right.
I use the analogy a lot because I'm country and my brain does things in country analogies. But when there's a fire in a barn, because I
Mhm.
said, I'm country. So when there's
I love it.
a fire, you have to go and you have to get all the animals out of the barn because they will actually run back because that's their safe space.
Yeah.
So what happens as first responders, healthcare workers, being in that fire is our safe space, and actually being outside of that is extremely uncomfortable. Because then
Bingo.
at that point we have to start processing stuff and talking
Yes.
about an uncomfortable position to be in. That's extremely uncomfortable.
Mhm.
I've experienced that myself,
Me
and
too.
I would say that was rock bottom for me, was when I was removed from that fire. Because as long as you're on that adrenaline driven, that high functioning, that
Mhm.
you're constantly just in action, it's easier to push that stuff, what we think we are. We think we are.
Yes.
We're really
Yeah.
not. But we think that we're pushing all those emotions down. We think we have it under control as we are becoming more angry, as we are becoming more on edge, more touchy. And I see that a lot. And I always, tell people in my audience, if you see that individual that can't seem to leave the department, is always picking up extra shifts, it can't function outside of the department, the hospital, that's the one you need to check on, because they are heading down a very bad road. So, that sounds like that's kind of the point that you were at. You were in complete denial.
But what do we do with I'm sorry. What do we do with those high functioning, taking extra shifts, getting it done people? We give them more.
Evidently. Well, yeah, we do.
Until
thankfully, in Nadia's case, she had a supervisor that said, "Hey, I'm going to check on her."
Yeah.
So kudos to him for doing that.
Absolutely. Like I said, it stung, but it was absolutely the right thing. And I would have kept going. Because it was more comfortable, to your analogy, it was more comfortable to sit in the fire and burn.
Absolutely.
And hope that by blowing on the smoke, I'd be able to put it out, than it would be to step out and say, holy shit, I'm burning.
Right.
I need to do something.
Those hurt.
Fire extinguisher, something, right? It was easier to sit in the fire and burn.
Yeah.
It was. And
wow.
It took so much to I mean, I didn't make the choice, but it took a lot to step out of it. And it wasn't until I was out of it that I was like, holy shit, like, I'm a mess. I'm a fucking disaster.
Third degree burns hurt a lot less than those first degree burns.
Yeah.
You burn those nerve endings off, right? Like you don't feel. And
that realization that you think you've got it all together, and then what is wrong with me? I mean, that literally is what your brain says is, I take care of others. I'm the go-to. I'm 911. I'm the emergency response. How can I be a mess? That's what you deal with. So then you end up with all the guilt and the shame and the stigma, and that's where all that comes into play.
Well, let's roll. You just put a perfect segue into the whole stigma. Just realizing that you're struggling and you're like, shit, I'm not 100%. I'm not the super rock star that I thought I was. My cape's got a rip in it, whatever you want to call it. That's one area that we have to deal with, right? That's a big one. But then there's this other area, Nadia, you and I talked about this a little bit. When somebody says they took the control away from you, oh, I'm stopping. I'm hitting the stop button. Fuck you. That's my stop button. Yeah, no. I'm stopping it. So now that's one thing in the military I was really big about was I am going to close my own book when I am ready. So when we retire, right, we're ready, or when we separate or whatever, we are doing it ourselves. That was a big deal to me, that I was going out the door on my terms, right? But there's also a whole group of people that didn't get that opportunity. And they get medically boarded for things like PTSD and depression, anxiety, all that stuff. And I watched this and I saw how much more of a struggle it was for them. So I guess I ask you this, Nadia, like what were you feeling on that side of the house that somebody said, yeah, no, pushing the stop button for you?
So I knew it was the right decision. I knew that he had made the right call. But I was lost. I was completely lost in not going to work, in not putting on my uniform, in not driving my cruiser and saving the day. I don't know. I didn't know what to do with myself. Once he hit stop, it was like, okay, yeah, you're right. But like, now what do I do with myself? I'm a mess. I don't even want to leave my house. A major issue of mine, a major trigger of mine is trains. And I was like, I live like 300 meters from a train track. I didn't want to leave my house because I didn't want to be surprised by trucks or trains. I didn't want to have a mental breakdown in front of people. I was ashamed. I was scared for people to know. I was scared that people would think that I was less than, or that I was incapable, or not strong enough. I was scared that people would think that I was just some like crazy person because I'm bawling my eyes out when a train passes. I was a disaster. I was a disaster, and I was lost in thinking like initially, okay, I'll go back right away, and then when that started, the realization started to sink in that this right away thing that I had in my head wasn't going to happen because it's been 2 years now. That was also a really hard thing because then it was like, well, will I ever get to go back? Like, will I ever be well enough? Will this always be my Achilles heel, or will I someday be strong enough to do this again? And that's been a 2-year kind of mental struggle, trying to sort out where to go and what to do and how to like continue on in a way that I can be proud of, like for me,
Right.
Yeah.
that I can find purpose in, that I can find meaning in. And that's been really, really challenging.
And I think the difficulty, like you said, when you're the one responding, you're the one saving the day. We tend to we become those professions. We are not, we don't know who we are outside of those professions. So I always encourage people to make sure that you know what you are outside of those professions. And to Donna's point when she said she wanted to write her own ending when she got to leave, and you see so many people that struggle when they are taken out of the job, even with retirement.
Right.
Law enforcement federal law enforcement in the United States, the age 50, that, they have to retire, and then they don't know who they are. And then they're doing contracts, they're doing private contracting, they're going back overseas, private contracting. You see all that because they don't know who they are outside of that profession. And it's such a struggle. It's such a struggle. But something else that you said, when you are afraid to admit that you're struggling, that you automatically associate that with I'm not competent. And for anybody that's listening, your response to traumatic events has nothing to do with your level of competence.
Nope.
You can handle a situation perfectly, textbooked. You can save lives and still have issues from that traumatic event. So your level of competence has nothing to do with that response.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. That was maybe one of the worst parts about PTSD at its worst for me, was that it gutted me. My like my self-confidence, my self-image, because you say that and I totally agree with you. And if somebody came forward to me and said, listen, I'm struggling, this is what's happened, whatever, my initial response would not be, oh, you're weak.
Right.
I wouldn't think that about somebody else. It's just what I thought about for myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It took away my confidence. It took away my self-image, and the things that I believed about myself. I used to believe that I was resilient. Now I think, I can't handle anything. These major extremes, which are not reasonable. But again, in the moment, at the time, at the worst of it, these are the things that I believed about myself.
Right.
And it's not true. It's not true. And a lot of the work that I had to do in the last 2 years was my self-talk, because I would say these things to my psychologist and she'd be like, yeah, but that doesn't actually make any sense. Like, that's not true. That's not accurate. Right. And she would challenge these thoughts. And I really needed that challenge, that counter to the things that I was saying to myself, because they were completely unreasonable and completely untrue.
And it's crazy how nice and how understanding we are with other people, but we don't show ourselves the same
Took
grace.
the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say, it's funny how we give grace to other people, and yet we will not do that to our, and we're all guilty. There is not a person around.
Oh, absolutely.
that is not in that, especially the healthcare first responder world and military.
Yeah.
Psh,
Yeah.
we all wear these little capes.
Yeah.
Flying around saving everybody, and then and it's funny how it hits on different levels, right? Like when I so when I had my son, I was working in a labor and delivery unit, and I remember I went back to work after 8 weeks, and I don't know, one of my first days, but I don't know, I'd been going back a couple weeks, and we had a baby in the nursery. And I popped in there just to see what was going on. And I'm like, this baby doesn't look so good. I don't know, he just looked off to me. And they're like, yeah, he had like a grade 1 bleed, like a mild bleed at delivery. And it's kind of a sad situation because he was put up for adoption. It was an open adoption, and the adoptive parents came, and then they decided they didn't want the child because they didn't think they could handle a child that potentially has deficits. And so I'm like, oh, and there was just something about it that night. I just knew something was going to go off. Well, sure enough, he starts to decompensate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm just going to tell you, you need me to stick an IV? I'd stick it anywhere. I'll stick it in a baby's head. I'll stick it in their foot. I'll stick it in their hand. Wherever I need to stick an IV, I can stick it, right? Like I was really good at that stuff. I was always the first one to like, okay, this is what we need to do. You go get this and you call for transport and blah, blah. I mean, that was just my nature, right? I jump in there and let's go. And we'd all work together. And I found myself when this happened, the baby starting to decompensate, needed to was having respiratory distress, and we were getting to the point where we were starting to have to aid the baby as we were positioning him to bag the baby. And I remember the 2 other nurses, they were newer. Combined, they didn't even have a quarter of my time, right? And so logically, I would think you would stay there, right? Having the experience and stay with a new one and have the other new person to go. I actually set them up and I said, okay, the baby, and I gave her the bag and they started doing it. I said, I'll go call for transport. And I left.
Yeah.
Walked out the door. And I remember thinking, there's a part of me like, what are you doing? And I went and got transport, got all that situated. And we weren't sure who had responsibility for the baby. And at the time, it was the lawyer. Fortunately, had a good ending. The actually biological mom came back and took, custody back of the baby. But I can tell you, I told my husband the next day, I said, you almost had another child. Like I was over there.
Going to take it home.
I was going to take this baby home. But I couldn't perform like I would normally perform. And I still beat myself up for it. Yeah. But if somebody had said that to me, I'd be like, oh, I get it. And I would totally give grace to that. Right. But
yeah,
couldn't do it. Why? Because it was too close to home. Because if you scrolled ahead 2-3 years before that, and I get handed literally a baby that's dead. I mean, he's not breathing, no heart rate, no nothing. And I turn around and CPR, we jump on him, lines, this, that, and the other thing. 2 years later, I couldn't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a hard one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And what do we do? We don't talk about it. We just
keep it under the rug. Move on to the next call.
Yeah. And hid behind, I'm getting transport. The reality was I didn't know how to take care of that baby because all I could see was my child. That was it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think kids, that's everybody's Achilles heel. Everybody. Yes. I think that we can't process. I think adults, there's disease processes and there's, they were taking part in activity that, led to this death or this accident.
Or they're 97. Yeah.
Right.
There's longevity.
So I think that our brains naturally process adults easier. Now, mind you, if it's a civilian, no, absolutely not. If they're not used to that. But I think as healthcare workers, first responders, we can process adult deaths easier. With kids, there is no processing that. There is no reason. There is someone was supposed to have been watching them. They were someone else's responsibility. So in our brains, we can't process those deaths. Or even those traumatic accidents, because I have one that the child survived, but it was such a traumatic event that that I was left with issues following that. But I don't the majority of people, yes, is children.
Even in the military, all the way down, subculture, special forces, if you or anybody is deployed, if you hear it was a bad mission, it was a really hard deployment, if you peel back that statement, I will guarantee you there's kids involved in there. Yeah. And I have seen that over and over. I got a call, kid you not, I got a call from unit, special forces unit up in Alaska. It was I think they're pararescuemen up in Alaska. I got a call from them one time. And this guy reaches out and says, I need help. Okay. And the long and short of it was their unit went out the year before, and it was the quote unquote bad mission. And they come back home. And I remember him saying to me, ma'am, I'm probably the better off than the rest of my unit. They've already gone through multiple suicides. They had multiple people commit suicide. And he said, at least my ex-wife and I still respect each other and like each other and co-parent together. The whole unit had got divorced, like every single one of them.
Oh, wow.
And so he was the first one to wave the flag and step forward and said, holy crap, I need help. And following that, it was like a domino effect. Once he took the chance and got to know the team that was helping him. And then once the others was like, they're good people, go here and you know, that kind of thing. So we were able to help facilitate. I'm not a mental health nurse or anything like that specifically, but we facilitated and got them into the care they needed and helped with all that stuff. Yeah. But when I hear bad mission, I'm like, say no more. I already know what's behind that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I agree that you can process an 85-year-old. You can process a 25-year-old that was doing illicit activities. You're just like, it sucks. And you're like, oh man, it sucks.
And you avoid the family and, the interactions with the family and you limit that. And, but it's for some reason our brains process that easier.
Yeah, so, for sure.
So Nadia, so now you're 2 years and you're technically still in the police force, right? You're still on the force. Yep.
Yeah.
And so in the last 2 years, now that you kind of acknowledged, and I think there's two different levels. There's acknowledging something and then there's digesting it. And you acknowledged and you were going to therapy acknowledging these things, right? Like this stuff happened to me, but when later on you started digesting it, going, holy shit, these things happened to me and this is the impact and this is why I'm like, you are connecting it, right? So now that you've done all that, how did you start picking the pieces back up? How are you changing the mosaic, so to speak? What are you doing?
Poetry. I've always enjoyed writing. But I never did it seriously. It was just kind of randomly when I felt like it, I would write something. Notebooks would take me forever to fill. But after I was pulled off the road, I started writing a couple pieces, super raw, super personal, not overly creative. They were entitled PTSD, PTSD 1, 2, PTSD 3, PTSD 4.
Straight to the point.
Yeah. It wasn't a lot of creative writing happening. It was just a lot of writing.
Direct's not a problem. One of the guys I took care of was battling cancer. He survived leukemia twice, right? And his motto is very straight up, fuck cancer. Okay. That's like his. There you go.
Yeah. So I really started diving into poetry. I started to write more and more. I started to allow myself the space on paper to acknowledge the emotions, the things that I was feeling. I started to get a little bit more creative with it. I started to try to put words to it in a way that would make sense to somebody else if they read it. But I was still very private. I was still extremely ashamed of where I was at emotionally and mentally. And it wasn't until November of that year, so November of 2022, the end of the month, I sat down here with a notebook, a pencil, which I pretty much always have, and a glass of whiskey. And I started an Instagram account, and I posted a couple poems. And I hoped everybody would see it. I hoped nobody would see it.
Right.
And I just started putting poems on Instagram, and it was like a way for me to sort of shed the shame, like
Yeah.
like, you know, just to try and shrug it off. And it was really the only thing I knew how to do to address that shame. And it wasn't until I started to do this consistently put poems on Instagram, that I actually did start to feel the shame slowly releasing me. And it was because of that healing process of being more and more public with my thoughts and my feelings, that I can sit here today and have this conversation, and not be ashamed about where I was, where I've been. And that, you know, that Instagram account, I'm honored to say has done fairly well. I mean, I think that all of us, everybody has, you know, things in their lives that got them, you know, whether it be, I mean, it doesn't matter. Everybody has these experiences.
Right.
But I think the emotions, right? The feelings that we have are universal. So while we all walk different roads and we have different experiences, the human emotional experience, I believe, is universal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from that perspective that I write poetry. So, you know, I write something about my experiences. I do so in a way that's relatable, so that when other people read it, hopefully it means something to them too. You know, and maybe it's framed in my head based on my experiences, but ideally it's meaningful to somebody else as well. And that's what I've been up to. I've been writing furiously, filled a couple notebooks, posted a lot of poems, and I'm really just trying to connect with other people who have, you know, been here, who have done it, or who are in it and don't know where to go. I'm at this point in my life, I am open and willing and wanting to have this conversation 100 times over. I want to talk to everybody. I want to talk one-on-one. I want to talk in a group. I want to have these podcasts. I want to talk, because when we feel like other people validate our feelings, when we feel like other people have been there, when other people understand, you know, and can empathize with where we're at, I think it makes it a lot easier to unpack our own shit.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so I've been trying to do that, just, you know, connect with people and raise awareness and have these conversations, and write a lot of poetry about where I've been. And some of it's long, some of it's short, but it's all pretty easy to read and pretty raw.
So how do we find you on Instagram? Is it under
under my name, Nadia
Okay.
Merchant, or the handle, she's _writing _now.
Okay.
She's writing now. Yeah, I kind of had fun with that name, just thinking, like, at the time, I'm a police officer. What the hell am I going to do now? Well, she's writing now.
So where are you at professionally? Where is that at?
Great question. I have no idea.
That's okay. That's okay if you don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I still carry a badge. I'm still a police officer. I just don't know where to go from here.
Right.
You know, I'm not all the way better. I'm miles from where I was, but I'm not all the way better. And I don't know, you know, if I went back to the road and I experienced another traumatic call, would it derail me again? I mean, that's what I'm terrified of.
Yeah. And you know,
I don't
recreating yourself is such an overwhelming, scary task, that I personally have experienced. And you know, the same as you, I always try to encourage people, because the job's still going to be there. It's going to be there. you in particular are not going to be there if you don't take care of yourself, but that job is always going to be there. So you have to come first in your life. You have to.
And then
Absolutely.
I think it comes to a point, you made this comment, Nadia, you're like, whoa, what if I can't go back? What if? What if? And then I wonder if there's a point where it turns into, do I want to go back? Am I okay where I'm at right now? I went through that when I was like, I left the nursing career and I was like, am I doing the right thing? Am I not? Am I this? Am I that? But then over time, it's like, now this is working for me, and and you guys ask me if you have the same thought, but when you are in terminal careers, so you have to go to the specific training to be a police officer. You can't just say, I'm a police officer. You can't just say, I'm a nurse, I'm an RT. I mean, people try, but they're also stalkers and weird. But those people
they go to jail.
Right, they go to jail. So you can't recreate yourself into our career field, like just pop up. And I'll tell you, it was super weird for me to be like, yeah, I'm an author. Yeah, I guess I am. I'm a writer because I am. But how did I get there? I put words on paper. Like, there was no massive process. I just started doing this, and I work on my craft. And I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner. There's no licensing for that. I mean, besides your LLC, but you are, because you just said you are.
Yeah.
That was really foreign to me. I'm like,
absolutely.
You can just say that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if people ask me what I do, I don't know how to answer them anymore.
My mom.
What do I say? I'm a police officer, sort of, kind of, not really.
You're a writer.
Maybe.
You get to say
I'm a
you're
writer,
a
I'm a poet.
Yeah, there you go. She's a poet.
I don't know how to answer people anymore.
I'm a badass survivor. What you got?
Yeah.
Maybe that's got to be my answer.
I always encourage people when I'm doing like one-on-one coaching, when they've been in a traumatic event, or, where the outcome was not what they wanted it to be. And I have them go through the steps and I say, okay, what other purpose did you serve in that event? Did you comfort a family member? Did you let whoever else was there on scene know that you had that control so that they could let it go? Did you attempt to work on that child? Even though the child may have died, someone else, you took that burden off of someone else, and they were like, okay, help's here, and they are taking control of this emergency. So I always ask them, what else did you do in those situations? And that kind of lessens, the outcome was not what we wanted, but what else did I do in that moment? And that seems to really help people kind of process those events a little bit better. And then in the recreating, which was extremely hard for me, I always worked critical care. It was what I knew. Felt like I was very, very good at it, saved a lot of lives. And then I had to recreate myself and find purpose again. And talking to people and sharing my story was how I found purpose. So am I still saving people? I mean, I don't think I personally am. I think I'm being used as a tool to help save people, but I'm still saving people. Nonetheless, I'm still helping people. So Nadia, you telling your story, you're still a hero. You're still helping people. You are recreating yourself, and you have just as big of a purpose as you did before. And it's just, you just have to own it. You have to just start saying, look, I'm still working towards the greater good. I still have my cape. I'm still helping people. And I've just been repurposed. So, I think that's just kind of, my way of recreating and making sure that everybody knows they still have worth and value in what they're doing.
And I think that was a process for me.
Absolutely.
Initially, right? I didn't see that. Initially, I didn't feel like I had a purpose anymore. I didn't have, any goals or anything. Like I was just sort of floating in this sea of PTSD, and it's all I could see. It's all I could see was PTSD. And now, like, I write with a purpose. I have these conversations with a purpose. I I want to talk to people with a purpose. And I hope that in having these conversations, in getting out there, in working through the shame, which was so difficult, in, people reading my poems, that the purpose is that, that people are able to see that they're not alone, that so many of us struggle, whether it be PTSD or any other mental health issues. We've all sort of been there to some degree or another, and it's real and it's validating and it's okay. And we're all a little broken, and
still a badass though. I mean,
that's right.
We don't do this. Like, we can't go land in these conversations unless we have experience, right?
That's
like if I was doing this at 20, I would just be looking at you guys like I have nothing to offer. Because I was still in college. My biggest stressor was the exams I had to take, and did I give that lady vitamins or did I give her actual meds? I forgot. Clinicals. So we didn't have that. So when we're on this end and we're like talking, I'm one of those people that can put myself in different scenarios, and I think back to when I was in my like 20s, and 30s, and I was in the military and I was getting it done, and I was a flight nurse and all that other stuff. And you see these people kind of like, well, us, right? We're just like, fuck, life hit us hard, man. And you're looking at them like, yeah, kind of thing. And now we're up here like, looking at those 20 and 30 year olds like, come on through. Come on through. The nice thing is we have some ropes for you. You pull your shit out. You pull yourself out of the shit. But we got ropes for you if you want some help. And that right there, Nadia, I think is what we all provide, is the ropes, right? Because we're all like, sorry, I can't pull you out of that crap, because you got to pull yourself out. It's the only way you can grow. But here's a bunch of ropes for you, And so we're now providing ropes, right? Badass ropes. Maybe that's your next podcast. Badass
there you
ropes.
Go.
I got a new one for you, Cindy.
Write that down, Donna. Write that down.
Badass ropes. I'm writing it right now. Cindy will be like, you cannot start another podcast. Nope. No, but Nadia can.
Nadia can,
This is my superpower. I get people involved in things, and before they realize they're involved.
She does.
Leslie.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the first person that interviewed me, not first, but I had somebody interview me for a book I wrote years ago. And 4 years after the book's out, they're like, hey, we want to interview you. And it was the same exact time Coming Home Well said, hey, we want to interview you. Right. So I have 2 interviews, same thing, just like we're doing here, podcast kind of thing. And at the end of those 2 podcasts, which were literally like 2 weeks apart, scroll ahead 6 months. One of them I now volunteer under and have my own. And the other one, she started another podcast under Coming Home Well. And she does some of our sweepers. And so she's badass, she was a pilot, right? She's a Navy girl, pilot, and all that stuff. And now she's doing this stuff. And I got her in under, well, not I, but I suggested. So, and now, see, all our worlds come together. So be careful, Nadia.
That's right.
Yeah, and watch out. I'd end up having 3 podcasts by the end of this week.
You already do. You just don't know it yet.
You just don't know it yet. You see our sly smirks. We're like, oh, look at that. All right. We'll just keep razzing you here. We should wrap her up. I promised Leslie I would behave and stay on time this time. So I'm staying on time this time. Sometimes we'll get going. So, all right, everybody. So I think the biggest takeaways here, well, I'm going to let you guys answer. Leslie, what's your biggest takeaway? Or you want to impart to the audience?
I just, first off, Nadia, thank you so much for sharing your story. And just, the biggest takeaway is, you being able to accept help, get the help that you need, still willing to reach back and help others. That's the biggest takeaway. So if anybody is struggling or recognizes someone else that's struggling, like in Nadia's case, check on them, check on each other and make sure they're okay. But definitely it takes a ton of guts to come forth and say, look, I was struggling and it's okay. It's okay that I wasn't okay. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
What do you got, Nadia? What's your last words of wisdom to the audience?
My words of wisdom. I mean, you know what? My words of wisdom would just be a simple reminder, just that nobody is alone in this, and I know that it feels like that way. I know it feels that way, but there are so many of us who have struggled. So many people, though, around you would be willing to help you. You have to have that first conversation.
Yeah.
That first conversation. You know, and there's so many resources out there, and again, you're not alone. You're really not.
Absolutely.
I use the analogy peak and troughs, right? Our life is got full of peaks and full of troughs, and we're allowed to be in both of them, but we're just not allowed to unpack our bags when we hit those troughs, right? We got to always be working towards the peak, right? Can't stay there. Right. So, all right, that's our wrap up for today. Leslie, I thank you for being our guest host. As always, coming in the clutch. Nadia, it was a true pleasure having you. I'm so excited that we met, and we follow each other on Instagram, so I'm sure we'll be in touch. And if you're feeling the urge to do a podcast, come talk. I seem to manifest. I've already got the name. I mean, what more do we want here?
That's right.
All right, it's Bullish Bedpans, and as always, we love it when you guys listen, share, comment, engage. You know, check out our Instagram and our Facebook page, and like Nadia said, reminds us that we are not alone. So you guys have an awesome week, and peace out.